the 1982 feature film Conan the Barbarian is widely considered a classic. Its 1984 sequel, however, Conan the Destroyer, isn't held in anywhere near the same regard, for the two movies are indeed very different. But why? How did that happen? They were made within 2 years of each other, by the same production company and under the watchful eye of the same lead producer. And both featured Arnold Schwarzenegger as Conan, so how could one end up so embraced, and the other so, well, if not reviled, then at best ignored? In this retrospective, I shall uncover just that, by first exploring the changing priorities behind the scenes, and how these manifested themselves on screen as the plot evolved from its very different original conception to what ultimately ended up in theaters. Then I'll go through the movie's production, share my own view on it, and finally, explore its fallout and impact on the franchise. This video does assume that you've already seen the ultimate Conan the Barbarian retrospective. If you haven't, be sure to check that out, and subscribe and hit that notification bell if you haven't done so already. Upon its release in the early summer of 1982, Conan the Barbarian was a hit. It would go on to gross $40 million's worth of $1982 at the domestic box office, which were great numbers for a movie with a listed production budget of $17 million. Conan had held his own in a summer which had also seen the releases of Rocky III, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, First Blood, Porky's, and Tron to name but a few. So a sequel was greenlit and fast-tracked into development. However, as pleased as distributor and co-financier Universal were with Conan's performance, they were much more pleased with the success of their other 1982 movie, namely Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which just so happened to be the highest-grossing movie of that year. If anything, they were so high on how well E.T. had performed that its success actually cast a shade on Conan's success. You see, Conan the Barbarian had been rated R, and for its time, it was very violent. By contrast, E.T. had been rated PG. See where I'm going with this? The PG-13 rating wouldn't be invented for another 2 years, in the tail end of 1984, so at this time, it was the PG rating that was all the rage. The number crunchers at Universal did the math and arrived at the conclusion that as successful as Conan the Barbarian had been, it could have grossed 30% more if it had been rated PG instead of R. That settled it. Universal were happy to put up about the same money for a second Conan movie as they did for the first, but they wanted a bigger return on their investment this time around. And to that end, they mandated a PG rating. As such, the dark and dreary tone, nudity and blood splatter of the original had to go, and be replaced by magic castles and light-hearted adventure. For Dino De Laurentiis, head of the production company, the De Laurentiis Group, Conan was merely an investment object, so if Universal were willing to put up the money for a sequel with magic castles and light-hearted adventure, and they projected that would lead to bigger profits for him as well, then a sequel with magic castles and light-hearted adventure was exactly what they were going to get. Since they were going in another direction, John Milius, the director of the previous movie, wasn't invited back. To this day, the official story remains that he wasn't available, and by all means, maybe he wasn't. But the real reason Milius didn't return was that he wasn't the right fit for the kind of movie they were making. Star Arnold Schwarzenegger was none too pleased about this. According to his memoirs, Total Recall, he had argued to the higher-ups that the direction they were taking was a betrayal of the character, the first movie, and the fans, and that if they weren't going to make the movie right, why make it at all? Sell it to someone who would. These complaints, of course, fell on deaf ears. They had the movie rights, they weren't giving them up, and Arnold was under contract. So he would have to play Conan as instructed and be damn grateful for the opportunity and the $1 million paycheck in public, regardless of what he might have felt privately. And so, development on a Conan sequel begun, this time with more magic castles and light-hearted adventure. The first Conan movie was initially set up by producer Edward R. Pressman. As we covered before, he was the one who secured the services of both Arnold and Milius in the first place. But getting the movie made meant selling the project to Dino De Laurentiis, which also meant that Pressman had to agree to be bought out of the franchise. This was a process though, and his final act before going out the door was commissioning Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway with writing the script for this more adventurous sequel. Roy Thomas, of course, was the man who brought Conan to Marvel Comics in the first place, and arguably the finest Conan writer there ever was, outside of Conan creator Robert E. Howard himself, that is. He even had experience writing family-friendly Conan for Marvel without sacrificing the character's integrity, something he had done for a decade in Marvel's main Conan book, simply called Conan the Barbarian. Although his best work was of course in the Savage Sword of Conan, where no holds had to be barred, and the stories were effectively R-rated. His co-writer, Jerry Conway, is another prolific comic book writer, who is known for, among other things, co-creating The Punisher and killing off Gwen Stacy. He is also a Howard fan, and went on to write an excellent King Conan storyline for the Savage Sword of Conan. To be clear though, it wasn't just their comic book credentials that led Pressman to hire them. Thomas and Conway had just written the screenplay for Ralph Bakshi's animated sword and sorcery feature film, Fire and Ice, which meant that neither Dino De Laurentiis nor the powers that be at Universal would object to their appointment. Thomas and Conway soon completed a first draft, titled Conan II, The King of Thieves. For all the virtues that can be assigned to John Milius' Conan the Barbarian, it didn't really capture who the character of Conan was. And the slavery and revenge motif had taken up so much space that the movie came across as a standalone movie where the story had been told and there was nowhere left to go. That is good and well for a standalone movie, but this was supposed to have been an introduction to Conan and his world, both of which the audience would hopefully want to get to know better over the course of multiple sequels. So what Thomas and Conway set out to do was re-establish Conan as the character fans knew from the comics and paperbacks, while acknowledging the events of the Milius movie. Their story began in Shadisar, the city of thieves, where Conan had built up quite the reputation as a thief and a fighter. For this, some called him the King of Thieves. The story picks up while Conan is pit fighting and learns that his friend Subotai from the previous movie is about to be hung. Conan rushes to save him, but it's too late. Subotai is already dead. Conan learns which judge sentenced him and that the punishment did not fit the crime. This judge's life is soon cut short, and to get over his grief, Conan goes to celebrate Subotai's life by drinking, fighting, and wenching. He does, however, brag about killing the judge, so he gets sold out and apprehended by the local authorities. While in custody, he receives a visit from a beautiful young woman, Atali, the daughter of Caranthes, high priest of Dagoth, the dreaming god. They heard about the King of Thieves being locked up and have need of his services, so they help him escape in return for his aid in retrieving a treasure from the lair of the sorcerer Yara. Atali and her eunuch manservant, Strabo, escort Conan to a mysterious lake, and in it lies the Temple of Ibis, presided over by the sorcerer Yara. Conan swims to it and initially tries stealth, but he is discovered and has to fight off Yara's sizable personal guard, which is led by the female warrior Sula, and her second-in-command Bombata. In the chaos, and entirely by accident, Conan kills Yara, in front of his own young son no less, which gives Conan flashbacks to when his own parents were murdered in front of him. Yara's son wants revenge, but he's still just a boy. Conan lets him know that he didn't mean to kill his father, but understands him wanting vengeance, and tells him to come find him when he's come of age. Then they'll fight if they must. For now though, Conan takes off with the treasure, the jewel called the Eye of Ibis. Conan rejoins Strabo and Atali, who promise him riches if he will escort them further through the Kisenkian forest. With Yara's guard, who are hell-bent on avenging their priest and retrieving the Eye of Ibis hot on their heels, he has little choice but to accept, and they flee to the jungle. There, they encounter the hostile Kisanki, and after some action that would make Indiana Jones jealous, they make it to their destination, the Crypt of Shadows. Here, Atali uses the Eye of Ibis to retrieve the Golden Horn of Dagoth. But with that retrieved, Conan has outlived his usefulness, so Strabo tries to kill him. This does not end well for Strabo. In fact, this is where he leaves the story. Atali and the Horn, however, are rescued with supernatural means by her father, the High Priest of Dagoth. By now, however, Yara's god, led by Sula, has caught up with Conan. Now is when Conan learns the true horror of what he has been party to. They tell him that the Golden Horn can be used to summon the ancient deity Dagoth, a god of hate and pain, whose reign will mark the end of mankind on Earth. The Golden Horn cannot be destroyed by mortal means, so instead, the horn was locked away, while the key, the Eye of Ibis, was hidden away, safeguarded for millennia by a sorcerer and his god, for generation after generation, right up until Conan stole it. Realizing that he has been set up, and doomed humanity in the process, Conan enters a reluctant truce with Sula, the rest of the god, and the son of the sorcerer he killed. Together, they set out to attack Caranthes, retrieve the Golden Horn, and stop Dagoth from bringing Armageddon in a pulse-pounding final act. This is a script that would have been very expensive to produce, but it also re-established Conan as the Conan fans knew from the comics and paperbacks. And it ended on a note which only closed that particular story, but which left the door wide open for more of Conan's adventures. In fact, it did everything the filmmakers could possibly want it to do. So what happened? Producer Dino De Laurentiis thought that the story showed promise, but that it needed more work. Work which needed his personal supervision, which is exactly what he gave it. De Laurentiis provided writers Thomas and Conway with note after note after note, all of which boiled down to dumbing the story down and making it cheaper to put on screen. The working title changed from The King of Thieves to The Horn of Dagoth, as Thomas and Conway rewrote their way through a handful more drafts. But in their opinion, each new draft was markedly worse than the previous one. Things weren't working out. In the end, Stanley Mann took over screenwriting duties. He used the most recent Thomas and Conway script as a starting point, so the one they were the least satisfied with, and then he incorporated all of De Laurentiis' subsequent notes for a few more drafts. Mann then proceeded to write the final shooting script for the movie, which now would be called Conan the Destroyer. To direct the movie, Dino De Laurentiis ultimately decided on Richard Fleischer. The son of legendary animator Max Fleischer, Richard had previously directed both Barabbas and Mandingo for Dino De Laurentiis, and back in the day, he had also directed The Vikings, a movie which coincidentally influenced John Milius when he was starting out and developing his style. At this point in his career, however, Richard Fleischer was 66, and he no longer got the directing opportunities he once did. According to Schwarzenegger's memoirs, Fleischer was glad to be working, and not about to jeopardize that by challenging any degrees he got from his employer. So if Dino De Laurentiis wanted magic castles and light-hearted adventure, that's exactly what he would get. Outside of that, Schwarzenegger was quite happy to work with Fleischer, as he tried to make the best movie he could, within the restrictions of the final shooting script and the studio mandate. One of Fleischer's contributions was making changes to Conan's physique and appearance. In the previous movie, Milius had wanted Schwarzenegger to lose his Mr. Olympia physique, as he didn't want his Conan to have the mass and definition that Schwarzenegger had. Milius' Conan was a warrior, not a bodybuilder whose perfectly defined musculature could only have come from the gym. Schwarzenegger had by that point already left the world of competitive bodybuilding behind, and instead set his sights on conquering Hollywood, so he had done as Milius instructed. Richard Fleischer, however, took the opposite approach. Where Milius had covered Schwarzenegger's body up for most of the movie, Fleischer wanted it seen. Fleischer wanted his Conan in the same attire fans knew from the Conan comics and paperback covers. Following from that, he also wanted his Conan to be massive, and more defined. To that end, he wanted Schwarzenegger to get back into Mr. Olympia competition shape and regain the mass and definition he had lost for Milius. Arnold hit the gym even harder than he usually did and got back to competition shape. John Milius' Conan the Barbarian may be the more iconic movie, but as a result of Fleischer's different vision for the character, the iconic images of Schwarzenegger as Conan are predominantly from Conan the Destroyer. Conan the Destroyer was filmed on location in Mexico, or Mexico for the locals. They could have returned to Europe to film there. The production was an expensive one, so they had the money. The simple reason for filming in Mexico was that Dino De Laurentiis was also filming another movie there at the same time, namely the epic space adventure Dune. That was a very big and a very expensive undertaking for De Laurentiis, so filming both Dune and Conan at the same time and place facilitated cutting at least some level of cost by recycling crews and sets. The production went on mostly without issues, apart from the one day when production on both movies was shut down by the censor of the Secretaría de Gobernación, after the Ciudad Juárez Press Association complained to them when a group of their more overzealous journalists had been mooned by the Conan cast, when they wouldn't stop pestering them for interviews. That was quickly sorted out though, and shooting on both movies could resume, but the delay did cost at least $10,000. The real issues, however, begun when it was time to secure the PG rating. Keep in mind, the PG-13 rating was still some ways into the future, so there was nothing between PG and R at this time. That was an issue, because despite the clear mandate from the studio, Fleischer and his associates couldn't help themselves. No doubt cheered on by Arnold, they had put some brutal fight scenes and blood splatter in the movie. Despite the Magic Castle, the movie came back rated R. As such, it had to be recut and resubmitted several times over before the MPAA finally rewarded this butchery by giving the movie the coveted PG rating. On June 29th of 1984, Conan the Destroyer opened to the public. The revised story by Stanley Mann opened with Conan mourning Valeria, his late lover from the previous movie. After Conan, and his new and stupider sidekick that De Laurentiis insisted be in the movie, are involuntarily subjected to a test by Queen Tarmis, a test which they pass with flying colors. Conan is given an offer he can't refuse. Go on a quest for the Queen, and she will restore Valeria to life. Rather than asking how the hell she plans on doing that, Conan asks what he is to do. His quest is to escort the Queen's niece Jenna the Virgin to a magic castle where there is a powerful gem, a gem which only Jenna can touch. If anyone else tries, that's not going to work out so well. So functionally, it might as well have been an Infinity Stone. Anyway, this gem will then lead the way to the jeweled horn of Dagoth, the dreaming god, which they will then restore to a statue of said dreaming god. Conan accepts, but to ensure success, Queen Tarmis enlists Bombata, the captain of her guard, to accompany them. Officially, his job is merely to assist Conan. Unbeknownst to Conan, however, Bombata has two more objectives. The first is to ensure that Jenna the Virgin stays a virgin, because a man like Conan could awaken her lust and carnal desires. And who knows what a brute like him is liable to do to an innocent girl like Jenna. But Tarmis has every faith in Bombata's ability to chaperone, because like Strabo in the original script.
Do you think he's handsome?
Can't you judge for yourself?
But how can I? How many times have I seen a man? A real man?
Bombata is a eunuch. Bombata's second objective is to ensure that Conan is killed once he has outlived his usefulness, because there is more to this quest than what Tarmis has let on. That detail is however withheld from Conan, who agrees to go on this quest. Since the magic castle likely involves magic, Conan recruits Mako the Wizard from the previous movie, and conveniently rescues him from cannibals in the process. On the way, they also pick up Grace Jones as Sula, now a loyal ally to Conan from the moment they meet. With the proverbial fellowship of the gem established, they head on over to the magic castle where Toth Amon protects the gem. Fans of Conan will recognize the name Toth Amon, for he is a supportive character from the original stories who was elevated to the role of recurring villain and arch-nemesis in the Lancer books and subsequent comics. I stress that fans will recognize the name, because outside of it, the mid-level boss that appears on screen has little else in common with any incarnation of Toth Amon that fans would recognize. The character is portrayed by Pat Roach, who also portrays the dual role of Thuck from Rogues in the House, whom the wizard transforms into, before being dispatched by way of the surrounding mirrors, which were loosely inspired by those of the Kull story, the Mirrors of Tusun Thun. Now having found the gem, they set about locating the horn. On the way to it, they have to fight their way through both an ambush and a night out. Before locating it, and more treachery with it. Mako discovers the fine print which Queen Paramis glossed over. Not so much what restoring the horn and bringing back Dagoth will do to the world, but that the process of doing so requires a virgin sacrifice, which is why protecting Jenna's virginity was so important. Because who knows what form Dagoth would take if the sacrificed woman wasn't a virgin.
Choose the form of the Destructor.
Regardless, human sacrifice is not what Conan or any of the others signed up for, so they fight back. Conan takes on the treacherous Bombata, but since Bombata is a eunuch, it stands to reason that he is also a virgin, so when Conan kills him in battle.
This doesn't work out too well, as Dagoth then comes back in the form of a, rubber blob, who would have looked more at home in a Godzilla movie from the 60s than such a big-budget movie from the 80s. That Andre the Giant is the one who portrayed this blob is of very little help. Conan makes short process of it, and with all foes vanquished, Jenna, the new queen, offers everyone a position in her court, and Conan is offered the greatest position of all, to become her husband, and by implication, become the king. Conan respectfully declines, and goes off on his own to become king by his own hand, a story we as audiences were assured would still be told. So the exact same ending as Conan the Barbarian. While Stanley Mann got the script credit, Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway still got the story credit, as many elements of their original story still remained, albeit not in a manner which reflected the vision and intent of their original Conan II, the King of Thieves script. Their subsequent dissatisfaction with not just the shooting script, but ultimately the finished movie, led them to adapt their original script into comic book form in Marvel graphic novel number 59, The Horn of Azoth. Some of the names were changed from the movie, like how Dagoth became Azoth, but otherwise, it is more or less the same story as was originally envisioned for Conan II. But let's stick to the version of the movie that ended up getting made. Conan the Destroyer doesn't hold a candle next to the Milius movie, but as I rewatched it in preparation for this review, I was surprised to find that I didn't mind it nearly as much as I thought I would. You see, my journey with this movie goes like this. I first saw it when I was, 12 maybe, and at the time, I actually preferred it to Milius' Conan the Barbarian. If you wonder what the hell was wrong with me, you can rest assured I asked myself that same question about 15 years later, because by then, I loved Conan the Barbarian and had come to find Conan the Destroyer to be damn near unwatchable. Now, another decade has gone by, and after having recently rewatched both, there is obviously no question that Barbarian is the vastly superior movie, but Destroyer? It's not that bad. Oh, it's not good, don't get me wrong. The whole magic castle sequence is a disaster from beginning to end. The concept of what a villain like Dagoth could be is utterly wasted, and the final fight is a joke. But on the whole, it's not that bad. To be clear though, not that bad is very faint praise. And what I find so frustrating is that there were so many different ways the movie could have been so much better than it was. But every time the powers that be were at a crossroads, they chose the wrong path. The first bad choice was obviously to mandate the movie be rated PG. That's where the downhill slide started. In so doing, they lost the tone of the original, and they lost director John Milius. We don't know what John Milius would have come up with for his part 2, but it's difficult to believe it could have been any worse than what we ultimately got. On that note, they could have gone with the original draft Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway handed in. No, it wasn't their finest work, and it needed more tweaking to make it filmable on the allocated budget with the early 80s era special effects at hand. But at the core, Thomas and Conway had come up with a solid Conan story and a more than worthy successor to Milius' Conan, given the studio mandates placed on it. Most importantly though, Conan was Conan in it. Even within the confines of a PG movie, an at least better movie than the one we ultimately got could have been made. But Dino De Laurentiis would have none of that. Like Tom Rothman would do to countless genre movies decades later, De Laurentiis started micromanaging the story process, but without really understanding the property. He hadn't micromanaged the previous movie, and that had worked out great. This time, however, expectations were higher, and so he probably felt the need for more personal oversight, even if that meant forcing opinions he wasn't qualified to have upon the filmmakers. This often happens, both back then and today, but no matter when it happens, it seldom leads to the movie in question getting any better. I find both Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer to be wasted opportunities, as they both at one point in their development had scripts that were far superior to the final shooting scripts that ultimately were filmed. In the case of Conan the Barbarian, the original Oliver Stone draft was better, and in the case of Conan the Destroyer, the original Thomas and Conway draft was better. Both scripts had their flaws, but both treated Conan like Conan and did him right. Which is something you can't always say about the Conan movies that ultimately ended up getting made. I can't help but think that if they had gone with something closer to those original scripts for the first 2 movies, we would have had all 5 Conan movies Arnold Schwarzenegger originally signed up for by now, rather than just the 2 we actually do have. The number crunchers who thought going PG would increase the box office gross by 30% were wrong. As it turned out, Conan the Destroyer grossed more internationally than Barbarian, but at the domestic box office, Destroyer fared poorer, about 30% poorer. The movie underperformed. It did decently well with critics, but as Arnold Schwarzenegger had feared it would, the more family-friendly Conan had alienated the built-in fan base who read the Conan comics and paperbacks. Indications were that they had lost the audience, and the whole ordeal made Arnold want to move away from the role of Conan. This, combined with the very high-profile Dune ultimately blowing up in De Laurentiis and Universal's face, resulted in a situation where getting a third Conan movie off the ground would prove to be a much more difficult undertaking than the first 2 had been. They did try though. Over the course of the next 2 decades, there were multiple attempts at making a third Conan movie. At one point, even John Milius himself returned to revive the franchise, as he handed in a draft and was all set to direct a King Conan movie. Why he didn't, and what plot both he and other prospective Conan 3 filmmakers were going for, will be revealed in the next installment of Ultimate Conan Retrospectives. Until then, let me know your thoughts on all things Conan the Destroyer in the comments.